I'm your host, Chris James. Saturday, August 26th, 2023, from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m., I will be at the 2023 Wonderland UFO Festival, 4522 Fredericksburg in San Antonio, Texas. It was quite an event last year, and this year promises to be even better. The place is air conditioned and the parking is free. It's also free to get in the building. So, mark your calendars so you don't forget. The Edinburgh UFO Festival and Conference has been rescheduled for August 11th and 12th. Now I'm not too sure I'll be able to attend. However, we shall see what happens. It's about 6 months away. Things do change. I did a show about curses back in June 12th, 2019. I mostly talked about cursed places and not so much the curses themselves. Due to the stories covering hundreds of years, I'm not going to follow any kind of chronological order. The dates will jump around a lot. Oh, yes, and I forgot to say tonight's show is brought to you by the Organic Man Coffee Truck. Best coffee on the planet, and life is too short to drink bad coffee. 4501 McPherson here in Laredo. If you can't get there, if you don't live in town, it's too far to drive, you can get their coffee from organicmancoffeetruck.shop. Gotta pay for the coffee. I do, not y'all. Well, I gotta pay for the I gotta pay them back for the coffee. That sounds much better. Okay, getting back to the show. A curse is an expressed wish that some form of adversity or misfortune will befall or attach to one or more persons, places, or an object. In particular, it may refer to such a wish or pronouncement made effective by a supernatural or spiritual power, such as God or gods, a spirit or a natural force, or else as a kind of a spell by magic or witchcraft. A curse can also be called a hex, a jinx, an imprecation, malediction, excretion, malicin, anathema, or combination. Lots of words, all meaning the same thing, cursed. The curse of the pharaohs was cast upon people who disturbed the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially the pharaoh. The curse does not differentiate between tomb raiders and archaeologists, what's the difference? And was said to cause bad luck, illness, and even death. The tombs would have a scroll or a carving on the entrance placing a curse on everyone who entered. The curse tales stated that the tombs and the burial sites should not be tampered with because a mummy resided within, and that they possessed unknown dark quantities that would cause harm and death to the person who disturbed them. Hey, the mummy's asleep, don't wake him up. How many times have you been in a hotel, put a do not disturb sign on the door, only to have the maid come and knock at the door and say, housekeeping? Happened to me all the time. Nobody said the mummy was going to come to life and go about seeking revenge. The actions would be the spirit of the dead or the beings tasked with guarding the tomb. One very famous curse was placed on King Tut's tomb. When Howard Carter and his team finally found the tomb of King Tutankhamun, yeah, that guy, Tut, in February 1923, the world went crazy. They were celebrating all over the place. Well, the tomb was actually discovered by accident November 4th by a young water boy named Hussein Abdel Rassal. Twice a day he would bring large pottery jars filled with water to the excavation site for the workers. As he was setting the jars on the ground, he uncovered a step going down into the tomb. So, King Tut's tomb was actually discovered by a young boy, not by an archaeologist. Well, the archaeologists did swoop in and they took the credit for the discovery. The young boy received a very small reward for his efforts. Centuries of grave robbers, followed by decades of archaeologists, had never managed to find Tut's tomb. So the tomb promised untold riches for the folks who are now digging. The first human to feel the touch of the curse was one of the expedition's financiers, George Herbert, the fifth Earl of Carnarvon. He was bitten on the face by a mosquito and later opened the bite while he was shaving. Herbert developed blood poisoning and died from a shaving accident. His dog died at the same time that he did. His death occurred a few months after the tomb was opened, and it had been 6 weeks since the press started telling the world about the mummy's curse, which was thought to afflict anyone associated with disturbing the mummy. And who was more associated than the guy paying for all the work? Legend has it that when Lord Carnarvon died, all the lights in his house mysteriously blinked out. Richard Bethel was Lord Carnarvon's secretary. He was the first person after Carter to enter the tomb. He died 1929 under suspicious circumstances. Bethel was found smothered in his room in an elite London gentlemen's club. These clubs were nothing like what people call gentlemen clubs today. Far from it. The club was where the super rich, the elite, could hang out, shooting pool, playing cards, and bragging about how much money they had. Women were not allowed, at least not officially. Most of these clubs were outside of the city, out in the countryside, so that the gentlemen could get away from the filth and the squalor that they were causing by their businesses. Lord Carnarvon's half brother suffered from King Tut's curse simply by being related to the Egyptologist. Aubrey Herbert was born with a degenerative, you shouldn't laugh while trying to talk and read, a degenerative eye condition and became totally blind later in life. A doctor suggested that his rotten, infected teeth were interfering with his vision. So Herbert had all of his teeth pulled in an effort to regain his sight. He died of sepsis as a result of the surgery 5 months after the death of his brother. Howard Carter, the archaeologist who took credit for finding the tomb, gave a paperweight to Bruce Ingham as a gift. The paperweight was a mummified hand of a dead guy wearing a bracelet that was inscribed with the phrase, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Ingram did not die due to the mummy's curse, but his house burned to the ground after he received the gift. When he had workers try to rebuild the house, the area was flooded. George J. Gould was a wealthy American financier and railroad executive who visited the tomb of Tut in 1923. He fell sick almost immediately afterwards. He never really recovered and he died of pneumonia a few months later. Hugh Evelyn White, a British archaeologist, visited King Tut's tomb and may have helped excavate the site. 1924, after seeing death sweep over about 24 of his fellow excavators, Evelyn White died from suicide. His last note said, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." American archaeologist, Egyptologist Aaron Ember was friends with many of the people who were present when King Tut's tomb was opened, including Lord Carnarvon. Ember died in 1826 when his house in Baltimore burnt down less than an hour after his wife and him had hosted a dinner party. Seeing that the house was on fire, Aaron ran to save his child. No, he did not run to save his child. He ran to save a manuscript he was working on, called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. His wife ran to save their son, and they both died of smoke inhalation. The maid died as well, but they don't know if she died while trying to save somebody or simply trying to escape. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist, x rayed Tut's mummy before the mummy was given to the museum authorities. He got sick the next day and he was dead 3 days later. I forgot. I'm not supposed to call them mummies. Somebody, I don't know who, might be offended. The politically correct term is mummified human body, in case you didn't know that that's what it was. James Henry Breasted, another famous Egyptologist, was a member of Carter's team when King Tut's tomb was opened. He returned home to find his pet canary had been eaten by a cobra and the snake was still inside the cage. He wasn't too sure how the snake got inside the cage because they say the door was still closed. The cobra was a symbol of Egyptian monarchy that kings wore on their headdress to represent protection. Breasted didn't die until 1935, but this was right after his second trip to Egypt. Howard Carter, the guy that actually opened the tomb, didn't die until he was 64 years old, and he died of lymphoma. Why the curse affected so many other people involved in opening Tut's tomb and not him is anyone's guess. Maybe his curse was watching as all the others died. He may have been plagued by thoughts of him maybe being next. One possibility is a curse works by the person involved believing something is going to happen, causing their own demise. Some people say if you focus on something, you may attract it, good, bad, or otherwise. Casimir IV was born November 30th, 1427. In 1440, his older brother was murdered, and the power behind the throne tried to use Casimir as their stooge. 1946, he succeeded in overcoming the power brokers in the 13-Year War. He reclaimed one of Poland's most important cities, Pomerania, and apparently he brought Poland up from the brink of despair. With a trusted parliament and advisors around him, the young monarch managed to elevate Poland's economic standing by aligning Poland with Prussia. Casimir became one of the most progressive Polish kings, and he established one of the prestigious and most powerful dynasties in Europe. In June 1942, King Casimir IV died at the age of 64 from unknown causes. Back in those days, it was common for heirs to any throne to use assassins to get rid of whoever was in their way. One widely used method was poison. This led to a new career being created, food testers. Before a monarch would eat or drink anything, somebody would try eating a small piece of everything on their plate to see if it was going to kill them or not. I'll bet that career had a pretty short lifespan. Immediately after Casimir IV was dead, his body began to rot. Usually it takes 3 or 4 days before there's visible signs of decay, but Casimir was in advanced stages of decay before the sun even set. The body was covered with calcium salt, draped in expensive silks, and placed in a wooden coffin that was then sealed with resin to preserve it for the journey to Wawel Cathedral, where he would be laid to rest. The idea was this was to be his final resting place. That was the plan. The royal relics and tombs passed through the hands of various authorities until it fell to Poland's communist government in 1970. Oddly, they imposed highly stringent regulations. Requests by academics and researchers to exhume King Casimir's remains for research and conversation were all turned down. The casket wasn't dug up until Cardinal Karl Wojtyla, Wojtyla? Yeah, Wojtyla. Polish words and names are, they got too many consonants, at least for me. Cardinal Karl Wojtyla, that guy, the Archbishop of Krakow, who would later become Pope John Paul II, much easier to say, demanded the exhumation. The main worry was the possibility that the tomb was going to be found in really bad shape because people would have broken in during World War II and pretty much ransacked it looking for valuables. Russian soldiers were known to do things like that. Well, come to think of it, so were soldiers on all sides of the conflict. When Polish media got wind that King Casimir IV was going to be dug up, they started talking about the curse that was placed on him that caused his body to degrade so quickly. And they started telling the world about it. Well, researchers opened the almost 500-year-old coffin on April 13th, 1973, a Friday. Yes, they opened the tomb on Friday the 13th. Well, the wooden coffin was completely rotted away, and what remained were small pieces of the king's corpse. At first glance, their discoveries were consistent with what was anticipated anytime they'd open a medieval tomb. Four researchers who had been working in Walwell Cathedral on the exhumation of the tomb passed away from infections in the following few days. Over time, up to 15 researchers who were either working on the site of the tomb or had something to do with the remains in a lab began to experience health problems, and eventually they all died as well. It appeared that anybody that had anything to do with the king's body died. 1999, a German microbiologist examined the remains of several mummified corpses which had been exhumed from around the world. What he found was that numerous types of mold spores that cause potential health risks to humans were present and they could be deadly if inhaled. I wonder if those folks who had unwrapping parties ever died from this fungus. During Victorian era, people would hold unwrapping parties where Egyptian mummies would be brought out and unwrapped for entertainment purposes. What fun! Hey, let's go get a corpse and look at it for a party. Most of these bodies contained a fungus called Aspergillus flavus. The theory was that all these researchers suffered from inhaling fungus, and that's what killed them. That is a cool name. I have got to use it in one of my books, one of the bag company books. I'll have a character named Aspergillus flavus. Well, the question I have is if this fungus was on mummified corpses, why is it none of the people at these unwrapping parties ever died from it? Today, to avoid contacting ancient curses, archaeologists who study ancient ruins or tombs must be in good health before they're allowed to go. They cannot have had recent health issues like cancer or anything like that, no pulmonary or cardiovascular issues. Also allow the tombs to air out before entering. Get rid of that mummy funk. There, I said it, mummy. Bangar Fort is known as the most haunted place in India, and perhaps the greatest unsolved mystery. Many haunted stories of Bangor Fort have transformed it into a bucket list destination for those looking into weird paranormal things. I would go, but I don't have the money to fly halfway around the world. If I did, that would be a cool sight to visit. One of the stories on why the place is cursed comes from when the fort was to be built. Emperor Madho Singh built the fortified city after he'd attained approval from Guru Balu Nath, an ascetic who used to meditate there. The saint gave his approval on the condition that the shadow of the emperor's palace should never fall on his retreat. The holy man said if the shadow ever fell on his favorite place, the palace would fall to a curse. Whether or on purpose or by accident, once the palace was complete, its shadow did fall across the holy man's building. It wasn't long after this that the palace began to fall apart. Attempts to rebuild were useless. Any new construction soon fell apart as well. Even as the fortified city was falling to pieces, the holy man's building still stood, and it is there today. There's a second story on why the fort is cursed. It says Princess Ratnavati was the best looking gal around, and she was rich, being the daughter of King Kashumbai. When she was ready to get married, all of the surrounding royals began to try to catch her favor. They tried to woo her. I guess she was kind of like Princess Buttercup from The Princess Bride. A sorcerer named Sing Iya was also trying to win her as his bride, but he was neither rich nor handsome. He was kind of considered an ugly, nasty old man. Being a sorcerer, he decided to use magic to win her over. Singya cast a spell on a bottle of perfumed oil that was then sold to the princess's handmaid. Once she used the oil to splash on a bit of fragrance, she would fall under his spell. The princess was quick to catch on to his ways. Not only was she good looking, but she had brains as well. And she dumped the oil out on the ground. As soon as the oil hit the dirt, it turned into a huge stone that rolled downhill, crushing the sorcerer. Before dying, Singhiya cursed the city of Bangara, causing it to fall apart and become irreparable. He also cursed the princess, and she was killed during a battle between Ajibarg and Bangara. Some locals believe that someday the princess will be reborn and she will lift the curse from the city. I hope I got that story correct. Any of my listeners in India, let me know how I did, especially those words. They're a tongueful. Not as bad as Polish, but hard to pronounce. Aokigahara Forest in Japan is said to have been cursed by the old sick people who were dumped there by decree of the emperor back in feudal Japan. In 1185, Japan fell under hundreds of land disputes between competing warlords, and food became scarce. Suicide was reserved for the upper society, who failed to live up to their expectations. Peasants were expected to keep living, despite a lack of food, and work hard so that the upper crust could go on living the way they wanted. If a family had an old member who was unable to pull their weight, it was customary to take them to the forest and leave them there. Come on, Grandma, we're going on a trip. Being abandoned by their families, the elders would soon perish by starvation, disease, or animal attack. There's no record of how many people were taken to the Sea of Trees to die. This policy of abandoning the sick and elderly went on for over 600 years. This way of dealing with the sick and elderly would come and go depending on how well the area was doing. how much food there was to go around. With all these people being dropped off to wander about the forest until they died of starvation or wild animal attack, there must have been a few people close to death who proclaimed a curse on the land. Why curse the land and not the people who abandoned them? The family were doing as they had been told. Get rid of those old sick people, or we'll get rid of you. Curse the emperor? Well, that just wasn't done because he was considered to be like a god. So, as people lay dying, perhaps the only thing they could vent their wrath on was the dirt they were laying in. Today, people visiting the forest find that their compasses don't work. GPS, cell phones are useless. Birds don't like to fly around the place, and other animals are few and far between. People are drawn to the forest to commit suicide. Each year, anywhere from 100 to 120 bodies are found. Some folks say they hear voices calling to them to come to the forest. These are people that live far from the place. All throughout the forest, you can find personal possessions left behind by people who just couldn't go on with life. Early in the morning, March 16th, 1244, over 200 Cathars were led by their bishop, Bertrand Marty, from Montségur, their fortified city, to a huge bonfire. These people walked into the flames to end their own lives. Mass suicide was considered preferable to being taken prisoner by the military that was coming for them. Today, there's a stone slab marking the spot where the mass suicide took place. After the Cathars had left, the fortification was torn down, and the French castle was built in its place. The new fort was built using the stones left from Montségur. The history of the Cathars runs deep all over southern France, but Montségur held a special place for them. It was a small fortress, it was their safe haven, and it was considered their church's seat of power. Catharism was a Christian religious movement that thrived in the south of what is today France in the 12th to the 14th century. Initially, the Catholic Church attempted to end this movement by sending missionaries in to try to get them to change their ways. Well, one of these folks, the papal legate Pierre de Castagnu, was murdered in 1208. This made Pope Innocent III decide on a more coercive approach. He instigated what became the Albigensian Crusade, a 20-year campaign against the Cathars. Although successful in bringing the county of Toulouse, whose count was perceived to be a supporter of these heretics, he came in under the French crown, they did not succeed in eradicating Catharism. After the Crusade, an inquisition was called to bring an end to the movement. This culminated in 10-month-long siege of Montségur. There's a persistent legend which talks of the mysterious and invaluable treasure that was being kept at the fort, and that in the days prior to their surrender, it was taken away from the site by 4 Cathars in the last days of its occupation. One theory suggests that it was the Holy Grail, as Montségur is believed to be the Holy Grail castle from legend. Some say the Grail was taken from Montségur and hidden somewhere in Rennes-le-Château. The hilltop fortress is said to have been cursed by the Cathars, even though it is now a French castle. Bad things befell the soldiers stationed there. Visitors today say the place feels heavy. Bad things are going to happen if they visit there. The Templars started out life as poor knights who wanted to protect pilgrims en route to Jerusalem. After living in the wing of Solomon's temple, better known as the stables, they suddenly had enormous wealth and power. Back in those days, soldiers weren't trained all that well. Mostly both sides marched into each other, and whichever side lasted the longest won. Knights were the only fighters that knew what they were doing. They had armor that actually fit them, and they had weapons used to defeat their enemies. The average foot soldier was given whatever piece of metal he could strap on his body. They mostly were given pikes, which was a long wooden pole with a spear tip on the end, and that was about it. Here, go kill that guy in the armored suit. Templars were very well equipped and well trained. They also believed that God wills it, whatever they were going to be doing. Just think, if you're going into battle and you believe deep down in your heart that if you die, you're going to go to heaven, are you going to be afraid of dying? Now, that's one of the reasons they were so fierce in battle. Anyone traveling to Jerusalem had to carry all their things with them that they thought they might need, and they had to carry a huge pile of money to pay for the things they didn't have, like food and housing. So a convoy of travelers moving through the countryside was going to be carrying huge amounts of gold and silver. All that treasure weighs a lot, and this meant you had to travel slow and you had to have more people with you to carry everything. The Templars came up with a system where you could deposit your treasure in Europe, travel to the Middle East, and then receive your treasure there, minus a small handling fee. They called it rent. As time marched on, the Templars began loaning money to just about everybody. The King of France, Philip the Fair, fair as in light skinned, not fair as in just, the king found himself deep in debt to the Templars. If you accused somebody of heresy and they confessed, well, you were going to get a reward, usually part of what they owned. This would also wipe out his huge debt. Philip accused the Templars of idolatry, worshiping either a figure known as Baphomet or a mummified severed head that they believed was John the Baptist. They were also supposed to have been doing nasty, horrible things that were, well, not right for mentioning on a podcast. Since the Templars owned, since the Templars answered only to the Pope, Philip had to get him on board as well. Pope Clement was pressured to issue a papal bull, Pastoralis Praemententa, on November 22nd, 1307, which instructed all Christian monarchs in Europe to arrest all Templars and seize their assets. And they had a lot of assets. A torture can get you to say anything. Many Templars confessed to anything just to get the pain to stop. By 1310, Pope Clement called for a papal hearing to determine the Templars' guilt or innocence. And once they were no longer being tortured, many of the Templars recanted their confessions. Well, Philip didn't want to release his prisoners and then have to pay them what he owed them. So he went ahead and used the previously forced confessions to have dozens of Templars burned at the stake in Paris. Grand Master Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay, he was the preceptor of Normandy, both retracted their confessions. Both men were declared guilty of being relapsed heretics and sentenced to burn at the stake in Paris, March 18th, 1314. De Molay called out from the flames that both Pope Clement and King Philip would soon meet him before God. Within 1 year, Pope Clement and King Philip were both dead. De Molay had placed a curse on these two men, and it worked. How could just saying something make it so? In September 2001, a document known as the Chinon Parchment, dated August 17th, 1308, was discovered at the Vatican's secret archives by one of the researchers. It had apparently been misfiled in 1628. It is a record of the trial of the Templars and shows that Clement absolved the Templars of all heresies in 1308 before formally disbanding the order in 1312, as did another Chinon parchment dated August 20th, 1308, addressed to Philip IV of France, also telling him that the Templars that had confessed to heresy were restored to the sacrament and the unity of the church. In other words, don't kill them. But Philip, well, he did what he wanted to. Have you ever wondered why the archives of the Vatican are in such disarray? I mean, they've had them for ever, what, 1,000 years? And yet they're still finding things hidden away in dark corners. We can thank Napoleon for the mess. 1808, Napoleon was about to control all of Europe. His army was moving through Italy. When they reached the Vatican, Napoleon demanded that Pope Pius VII surrender the Vatican to the French emperor. Well, Pope Pius told him to pound sand. He said, nay, nay. Well, Napoleon got mad and he had the Pope hauled off to Paris along with all of the archives. Hundreds of thousands of documents were loaded into wagons and hauled away. Every book they could get their hands on was dropped into boxes and trunks and sent north. Nobody bothered to keep any kind of an order. They just grab them off the shelves, throw them in boxes, put them on wagons, haul them out of here. Well, few, if any, of the soldiers tasked with moving the archives knew how to read or write. So they just grabbed what they could and threw it in the boxes. And now they were tasked with this huge weight. Books weigh a lot, that they had to move the quickest and easiest way possible. Everything was just piled together in boxes and crates. Rare documents were mixed in with letters written by Michelangelo. Maps that had been hand drawn by Columbus were stuffed into chests, and letters about the weather in Constantinople. Everything was just a big pile. When Napoleon's empire began to crumble in 1815, the archives were just pushed into a warehouse in Paris. The cost of returning everything back to the Vatican was extraordinary. They didn't have an army that they could tell, go grab that library and move it. So, to save time and money, the cardinal who was put in charge of the archives burned some of it just to get rid of it. Anything that was old and he didn't like, I guess. He also sold other valuable documents to anybody that wanted them. Some ancient documents were used to wrap trinkets that were sold in shops. Others were used to wrap food items like bread and fish. We're talking tons of valuable documents and books that we'll never see again. Once they had enough money to return the archives to Rome, the boxes and crates were all piled into wagons once more and drugged south. It took months of travel. Once back in the Vatican, everything was just once again into the library. It was then necessary to open each and every box and start sorting. The sorting is still going on today. Incredible finds happen all the time as letters and documents are found, written by scholars and leaders from the past. Shame on the mess. Some of y'all will get that comment. The story of Oak Island is my favorite TV show. Of course, the folks in Hollywood had to give it a catchy name, so they went with The Curse of Oak Island. I have tried to find out when and where this curse was actually from. Where did it first show up? And nobody can say. The curse, which is said to have originated more than a century ago, states that 7 men will die in pursuit of the Oak Island treasure before it can be found. So far, 6 men have perished in their search to find the fabled riches. Now, Dan Blankenship did die, but he didn't pass away on the island. He died in town at the hospital. Nobody can put a finger on when the curse was first mentioned. A few writers have speculated it came from the folks living in town. Not the curse, but the idea that there was a curse. The Oak Island Association began digging for treasure in 1861. A pump that was used to drain floodwater from the hole malfunctioned and exploded, killing an unnamed man. At that time, they wrote his name down, but they didn't keep it in the county records. So eventually they lost track of who it was. 1897, Maynard Kaiser fell to his death into a well. These two deaths caused a lot of stir amongst the workers who began talking about a possible curse. At that point, the curse had not taken the 7 men must die form yet. These first two casualties did help mutate it into a legitimate, far reaching superstition. Why 7? If I was going to place a curse on something, it'd be more like 100 or maybe 700, but why just 7? If you're looking at the first 6 fatalities, like they are right now, uh, nobody wants to be number 7. So everybody's going to be real careful. What happens once that one last guy meets his maker? Will the Lagina brothers wake up the next morning and find whatever it is that's buried at the bottom of the money pit? Or is the 7 just a random number that somebody attached to the original curse? Maybe it's not just 7 people have to die. Maybe everybody or anybody involved may die. Some have speculated the curse is what comes over people who go looking for the treasure. Millions of dollars have been spent, and hardly anything of great value has been found. It's like how people will keep pumping coins into a slot machine right up until they're flat broke. It's going to pay off someday. Maybe, maybe not. Just because the show follows the curse of Oak Island, they came out with the curse of Confederate gold. At the fall of the Confederacy, piles of gold and silver were loaded into wagons and placed on board trains and shipped out of Richmond, Virginia. The plan was to move further south and try it again. The South shall rise again. I've been hearing that my whole life. Texas and Mexico were going to be part of the new South. And nobody knows how much was shipped out since nobody knows how much they had. But the treasury of the Confederacy vanished at the end of the war, cursed or not. People have been looking for it for the last 150 years, and every once in a while they do find a cache of gold or silver somewhere, and they've been looking for it ever since. Italians' city of Calabraro was placed under a curse in the early 20th century. The story goes that a lawyer named Biagio Virilio, while arguing a case in court, declared that if he was lying, that the chandelier would fall from above. Moments later, the chandelier did come crashing down. Locals believe the moment was a jinx, and even mentioning his name is now an omen. Nobody has said whether he lost the case or not. Shortly after a team of researchers arrived in town seeking the aid of a local woman known as La Catre, the woman cursed them. And since then, visitors and locals in town have routinely fallen victim to strange accidents. Apparently, they have more car accidents in this town than they should. By per capita statistics, they have twice as many car accidents as seems possible. They also have other accidents. The village is thought to be a witch's lair, with many of La Catre's descendants still living there. Over the last 100 years, Calabraro has seen more than its fair share of freak accidents, improbable landslides, an unusually high rate of car accidents, and a lot of babies that are born with bizarre problems. The population of the town plummeted from 5,000 to 1,500. It doesn't look like a spooky town. It looks like any quaint village in Italy, and yet few people want to live there. And if you do go and visit, make sure your insurance policy is paid up. Another famous cursed location is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. The story goes back in 1860 when the U.S. government was honoring those treaties with the Indians by trying to wipe them out or enslave them on reservations. The Army got the Ute Indians to go after the Navajo. To get even with their fellow Indians, the Navajo placed a curse on the land using a skinwalker. A skinwalker is an Indian witch who kind of sold his soul to the dark spirits for power. I find it hard to believe that the Navajo would stoop to such an act, seeing as they consider skinwalkers so bad that they don't even talk about them. But I wasn't there at the time. Maybe they were really mad, and they thought that this was an acceptable thing to do, considering what the Ute had done to them. Like going to the devil in order to stop an evil act. Somebody selling their soul to the devil so they could kill Hitler. Uh, the best intentions will still get you a one-way ticket downstairs. The question I have is, was it the curse that is causing all the trouble, or is there some kind of a portal or to another dimension, and the coming and goings of things from there is what's causing animals to die, electronics to fail, and bizarre sightings to be commonplace? If you haven't watched the show, it's pretty cool. I like it. Yes, it's a lot of Hollywood. You have to kind of sort out the wow, the fantastic from the interesting and the real. Brunswick Springs are cursed by the Abenaki Indians who used to live there. They used the water to heal illnesses and injuries. In 1754, a soldier was wounded during a battle. White guy. His Abenaki companion took him to the springs so the injury would be taken care of. The soldier was healed, and once the fighting was over, he told others about the spring and its healing abilities. He began filling bottles with the water and selling them to anybody with any kind of a sickness or injury. The Abenaki objected to the water being sold in order to make money. The water was a gift from the spirits, and it was not right to be making money selling this gift. When the Indians tried to stop the wanton exploitation of the resources, a fight broke out, and a few of the Indians were killed. One was the child of a woman who had powers. This woman placed a curse on the water, saying anybody who tried to profit from the springs would find themselves a failure. The springs were called the eighth wonder of the world due to the belief that the springs, for some source, split into six unique mineral water springs. People wanted to get in on the profits to be made, and several hotels were built close by. Come stay at the such and bathe in the healing waters of the spring. All the buildings that were built anywhere near the spring caught fire and burnt to the ground. Any bottling plants wound up being plagued with mishaps. No matter how careful or how well planned the operations were, they never turned a profit. Many businesses were built near the springs only to lose more money than they made. People who went there to use the water without buying or selling anything found relief from whatever their problems were. Only those wanting to profit encountered failure. People still visit the springs today. They go there to drink the water or simply bathe in it and heal aches and pains. A lot of the folks swear the water is helping them. As for making a business anywhere near the place, today the Abenaki own the land. They got it back finally. And they say, no, you're not building anything around here. Dudleytown was once a thriving community, and today it's just a ghost town on private property. Nobody is allowed to go there. If you ask, maybe real politely, the owners might let you in, but probably not. The town's legend has long attracted paranormal investigators and journalists. Hikers occasionally sneak in and they go to see if the place is really haunted or not. Some hikers who have been in the area report seeing mysterious orbs traveling about through the trees. They sometimes hear things like voices or footsteps when nobody is there. The story goes back in the 1700s when the Dudley family moved to an area near Cornwall, Connecticut. The Dudley family brought a curse with them. During the reign of King Henry VI, Edmund Dudley was beheaded for being a traitor to the crown. All members of the Dudley family were believed to have been cursed ever since. And when Edmund descendants moved from the old world to the new world, they brought that curse with them. The king was considered to be unstable upstairs. It wouldn't have been that hard to believe that he may have somehow gotten a curse placed. According to the curse, all Dudley's descendants would be surrounded by horror and death. Those who believed in this curse say the Dudley family began to experience a disturbing run of bad luck. There were farmers who made a home for themselves in Dudleytown. They owned the land and they allowed other people to come and live there, but things never turned out well. The land was not good enough for farming, and by the 1800s the settlement was abandoned. Many mysterious events, such as madness, suicide, fatal accidents, natural disasters, vanishings, and unexplained sightings led to articles appearing in the media talking about the curse. One of the Dudley brothers went insane. At a barn raising, a man fell to his death. Some say he was actually murdered. Lightning struck and killed a Dudleytown woman who was sitting on her porch. She was the wife of General Herman Swift. He later went insane and died from something. A sheep herder lost his family and his home. His wife died of tuberculosis, and all of his children simply vanished. Then his house burnt down. He wound up wandering off into the woods, never to be seen again. It has been reported that two women, Mary Cheney and Harriet Clark, both went insane while in Dudleytown, and both committed suicide. Clark said that she had seen demons running around just before she died. The Salem witch trials are one of America's most famous and infamous episodes of mass hysteria. Between 1692 and 1693, the town of Salem prosecuted at least 200 people for witchcraft. 19 people were executed, including a local man named Giles Corey. Now, nobody was burned at the stake. They didn't do that. They were all hung, well, except Giles. I think I'd rather be hung than what happened to him. Uh, Bad things. Giles Corey was a prosperous Salem farmer who, along with his third wife, were accused of witchcraft April 18th, 1692. Corey was 80 years old at the time of his arrest. Now, he actually believed that his wife was a witch until he was accused of witchcraft as well. One of his accusers claimed that she had seen Corey appear as a spirit before her. She said his spirit tortured her and forced her to pledge her soul to the devil. Just like with Philip the Fair, if you accused your neighbor of witchcraft, you were rewarded by receiving part or even all of their possessions. This led to a lot of people accusing each other of witchcraft for profit. To add to the mess, spectral testimony was allowed. You could say you had a dream of somebody committing a crime, and this was enough for an arrest and a severe questioning, better known as torture. If you confessed, which was the only way to get them to stop hurting you, you then were sent to trial, where your accuser could say anything they wanted, no matter how bizarre or crazy. If you were found guilty, you lost everything you had. If you were lucky, you at least got to live. Some folks were found not guilty, only to be arrested again a short time later for the exact same crime. Giles Corey was accused of witchcraft. The sheriff demanded he plead either guilty or not guilty. Either way, he would be questioned and then placed on trial. Corey simply refused to make a plea, knowing if he kept his mouth shut, they couldn't take him to trial. And supposedly, they couldn't torture a confession out of him. Unfortunately, the authorities had a loophole that they could use. They called it peine forte et dure, meaning hard and forceful punishment. This was an attempt to force him to make a plea. They weren't torturing him to admit to witchcraft, they were torturing him to get him to make a plea. Okay? September 17th, Sheriff George Corwin ordered wooden boards to be laid across Corey's naked body, and then heavy stones were slowly added. Corey endured this death by pressing for 3 days without crying out in pain. He was asked to enter a plea, and each time he simply said, just add more weights. I don't think that's really what he said, but something to that event. If you can't draw in enough breath to say much, you're not going to say, put on more weights. You're just going to go, anyway. Corey died on the third day, but he had never admitted or denied being a witch, and therefore his property remained that of his family. However, before he died, he did place a curse on the sheriff. Also, his ghost is seen walking up and down the street near the cemetery during or before every major disaster that has struck Salem. He was seen the night of the Great Salem Fire in 1914. Others have seen what they believed was the ghost of Corey, and then shortly thereafter there has been some kind of a huge disaster hit the area. He also cursed the sheriff and all sheriffs to follow him. He said that they would all die from either blood poisoning or heart problems. The weird thing is that since that day, everyone who has served as the sheriff of Salem has died from either a heart problem or blood disorder. This became such a problem that eventually they simply moved the sheriff out of Salem. They moved him to another town, Middleton, in 1991. Since that time, none of the sheriffs have gotten sick and died from blood poisoning or heart disease. How is a curse put into action? I don't mean verbally. I mean, where does the power come from? The curse of the pharaohs was put into place by the priests who were responsible for the mummy. And these priests would place the words on a scroll or on the door of the tomb. They believed this power was coming from the gods they worshipped. King Casimir IV's curse just might have been fungus found inside his body when it was dug up, or maybe it was something else. They were never able to explain why his body began to degrade so soon after death. A Bangor fort was cursed by a sorcerer. He would have known the right words, seeing as he was an evildoer. He would have studied that sort of thing, so he would have known the proper words to say to place a curse on something. Perhaps Ayokigahara Forest isn't cursed, but it retains all of the negative energy released by the thousands of people who died there. Ayokigahara. I have no idea what that other word was. It probably means something in Japanese. I have listeners in Japan. I hope it wasn't a curse word. Grandmaster Jacques de Molay was not a wizard or a sorcerer. He was a warrior monk who was falsely accused of some nastiness by his debtor in order so that person could get off scot free. Anyone placing a curse has to know how to do it. Perhaps de Molay, knowing that his days were numbered, had one of his associates smuggle in the instructions on how to place a curse on his accusers. There has to be more to it than simply saying, I curse thee, and something or other is going to happen. If that were the case, I think everybody in this country would be cursed by somebody. Magic is performed by specific words being spoken in a particular way. Some folks say you have to speak Latin or some other obscure language. It sounds almost like it's a prayer, only who are you praying to? Depending on who you read, there are lots of ways to curse somebody or something. Is it all about our intentions? You really want this curse to work. It's so important that you put your very essence into it. Could there be some connection to the soul? If so, will placing a curse on someone or something interfere with your soul either going to heaven or reincarnating or whatever it is your soul is supposed to do? Can you do more than one curse? Are you just limited to one? The evil eye is a form of a curse that happens when a person who has the ability feels a very negative emotion, typically envy or jealousy, but sometimes it's anger. This intense negative energy is projected into a person that they feel negativity about through their gaze. You catch eyesight with this person and they're looking at you and they have evil intents. They're mad, they're upset about something, and the next thing you know, you've been cursed by the evil eye. What happens is you immediately start feeling a bad headache, and the headache gets worse, and bad things start happening around you. Now, the good thing about the evil eye is it's relatively easy to get rid of once you realize that it's there. You simply have to clear yourself. You go outside. I believe you face north. You put your hands out to either side of your body. You inhale and exhale very deeply several times, and you simply think to yourself, you're being cleansed. And then you surround yourself with a white light, and nothing else can get in. At least that's one of the recommendations that I've read. There's also a test you can take to find out if you've been cursed or not. All you need to do is search for uh, curses on the internet, and there's hundreds of pages that will tell you all about them. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends know that they've been missing something interesting. If you have any suggestions for the show, you can contact me at strangethings@arcanasa.com. If you'd like to buy one of my books, you can get them at Academy, and you can get a T-shirt. Not this one, but you can get one of my T-shirts at tpublic.com. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things, and if you'd like, you can hum the exit music because it doesn't play anymore.